Introduce myself. I'm Judy Elsley, Dr. Judy Elsley, and I earned a PhD in literature and taught at Weber for many years. My PhD dissertation was on the semiotics, the social meaning of quilts. So I have published academic articles about quilting, and I am also a quilter myself. And these days, my quilts are almost entirely, always made of my hand-dyed and stamped or decorated fabrics. I can't remember the last time I went to a quilt shop and bought commercial fabric. Let's see, I started when I moved to this country. I'm English, and I moved in 1979, so a long time. I was never a good sewer at school because they required us to make garments, but when it came to quilting, you just sewed in straight lines, and I could do that. So I just started by making a lot of blocks, and then I had to figure out how to put them together and then how to quilt them. So by the time I finished my first quilt, I was sort of hooked. I think two things mostly. One is the natural world. I think nature always does it better, and we're just poor imitators of nature. And the second is my own life. Many of my quilts are autobiographical. I have a basement studio, a room that's dedicated to making quilts, and all my stuff is in that room. It's a big room, and one long wall is covered with fabric, with a kind of felt fabric, so that I can pin things to the wall. And then I have a small, in my laundry room, the studio is my dry room, and the laundry room, which is smaller, is set up as well to be a wet room, which means I can dye fabric there. I usually have more than one going at once. Yeah, multiple probably. And that was what I was talking about at the beginning, that when I first started, I bought commercial fabrics, but these days I never use commercial fabrics, and I only use my hand-dyed and printed fabrics for my work. I started by using patterns. Everybody starts by using mostly geometric patterns, but over the years I've just designed my own quilts, and a lot of it is a very intuitive process where I put one piece of fabric up against another, and then I cut it and sew it and add something else. So it just sort of grows intuitively. Oh, goodness, that's a very good question. It depends. Sometimes I get stuck where I don't know what the next step is. And so it sits, it hangs on my wall maybe for months until I figure out what it is that I want to do next. It's, as I said, it's an intuitive process, so I'm sort of dependent on the idea finally coming to me, and it does eventually, but sometimes it takes time. In other cases, I kind of know what I'm doing right from the beginning, and the quilt just takes maybe a week. I don't, it varies. It is a really interesting idea, and there's room for a lot of movement in there. One quilt that I submitted, which is a paper quilt, is about the intersection between art and craft, and between quilt and non-quilt. So we have these designations, these boxes that we put our work into, or that we put categories. Art is, that's superior, and craft is sort of inferior. A lot of that has to do with who does craft and who does art. And So the quilt is asking questions about what's the difference between craft and art, and why do we make that distinction? But more particularly, it's asking questions about how do we define what a quilt is, and when it breaks the boundaries, as this one does because it's made of paper, is it still a quilt? So that's one example. Another example of, so that's one kind of intersection, is between categories and trying to break down the barriers between categories, make intersections between the categories of, say, craft and art, quilt and non-quilt. But a second area is that autobiographical area, and that's a very personal intersection between within me of coming to particular realizations, and the quilt becoming more me is definitely about growth, development, sort of pulling all the pieces together, if you like, into a single intersection, which is me. And the last one that I submitted is a scrap quilt. And I don't throw out any of my scraps because they've taken so much time to make. But quilting, quite literally, there's an intersection between fabrics. It's putting this this texture, this piece of fabric up against that piece of fabric and seeing what happens. And so I really like the sort of unpredictability of what happens when you put this piece of fabric up against that, and I'm making intersections to create a whole. I just love being part of the Utah Surface Design Group. It's a very active group. I'm with people who have the same sort of passions that I have. They're absolutely wonderful women. I just love those women. And we often do very interesting workshops together. It gives me a fabric community.